In this chapter, we're going to be talking about socialization and gender roles. So as we kind of go through the objectives, some of the things we're going to be discussing, we're going to take a look at what's known as the nature-nurture debate. We'll take a look at the difference between terms like sex and gender. We're going to discuss how gender is socialized or taught in society. And we'll finish up taking a look at the significance of the women's movement and equality and how all of these things have really kind of changed the family unit. So the nature-nurture debate, I'm sure that you've heard of this, and the major debate is our behavior and our actions geared more towards our genetics, our hormones, being born biologically male or female, our sex hormones like males having more testosterone and females having more estrogen. Is it more driven by those genetic biological things that we inherit through our genetic bloodline, or is it more of the environmental factors that really kind of shape our behavior and how we act in society? So if you take a look at the first term here, this is sociobiology. This is a particular type of science. It's a biological science that takes a look at how our genetics, our sex hormones, our biology, being born biologically male or female, how it shapes our behavior on a social perspective. That's why it's called sociobiology. These are biologists that study human behavior based on our genetics. And a lot of times they will take a look at twin studies, where if you are, if you're an identical twin or fraternal twin, how close your genetics are to your siblings or your family members, and how that really can kind of shape our behavior. So it'll take a look at certain biological aspects like bipolar disorder, also known as manic depressive, that has a genetic component. It'll take a look at schizophrenia, that has a very strong genetic component as well. Those types of biological or genetic predispositions, even alcoholism or the tendency to maybe have drug addictions if we inherit some of those biological traits from our family. Sociology will take a look at more of the nurture side, not so much the nature. It doesn't reject nature at all, but it takes a look at nurture, our environment, the way we are treated by our parents, by our family members, by society, those positive experiences, those negative experiences, all those things that really kind of shape us, not just in our childhood, but throughout the course of our lives. And so that is social learning theory. Social learning theory is going to take a look at how our environment and also our personal experiences really kind of shape our human behavior. So in this chapter, we're going to be talking a lot about gender and gender roles, and so we're going to be really kind of discussing how gender is something that can be heavily shaped by our environment. And so the debate kind of goes on, whether we're debating intelligence or personality or sexual drives, addictions, mental disorders. And a lot of times it is on a spectrum. There may be certain elements that there's a genetic factor like schizophrenia, but then again, schizophrenia can be woken up from a dormant state through environmental stressors. If we take a look at alcohol addiction or drug addiction, then there's a belief that there are genetic components that we can inherit from our family members, but also there are environmental factors. If we expose ourselves to addictive drugs, then there's that environmental component to struggling with addiction. So it's most likely on a case-by-case basis whether or not certain behaviors we have are more driven by our genetics or by our actions, and most likely it's going to be a little bit of both. Margaret Mead is a very famous anthropologist back in the 1930s, and anthropologists will often live among certain groups of people that they're trying to study or understand on a deeper level. And this is what she did in the 1930s whenever she observed 3 different tribes of in Papua New Guinea. And so these 3 tribes, the Arapesh, the Mundagumor, and the Chimbuli tribe, she noticed that their gender roles were very different from each other. And gender roles are society's expectation of your behavior based on you being born biologically male or biologically female, whether or not they expect you to be very masculine as a male or very feminine as a female. And the one thing that she really kind of notices that whenever she was visiting these various tribes is that there was a very strong environmental component to gender roles and how they were shaped by our environment and the way that we were raised. So among the Arapesh people, they tend to be highly aggressive. At one time, I believe they were cannibalistic. And so both the males and females tend to be very dominant, very masculine, and very violent because they were kind of raised in that environment. So that was the expectation of both males and females, to be hyper-aggressive and in a lot of ways kind of dominant and masculine. The Mundagumor people, both males and females, this was a peaceful tribe, were expected to be, and they were kind of shaped by their environment to be very warm and very welcoming, and to some people they would be viewed as somewhat passive and more feminine. So that was shaped by their environment as well, despite their biology of being born male or female. The Chimbuli tribe was a matriarchal tribe where it's more of a female-dominated type of society. And so women were expected to be more dominant, more aggressive, kind of be head of the household, and the males were expected to be more dependent upon the females, more passive, and kind of take a back seat to women, not only in society, but also legally and also in the family unit as well. So Margaret Mead kind of discovered that gender roles are very heavily shaped by our environment. So let's kind of take a look at the difference between the 2 terms that are often used interchangeably with each other, and that's going to be sex and gender. So sex is going to be the biological component of we humans. So if you're born biologically a male, then you would have an XY chromosome. If you are born biologically female, you have an XX chromosomes. So it's often tied into not only our chromosomes, but also our sex organs and also our sex hormones. Gender is going to be more of the cultural side of how people express themselves based on their biological sex. So if you take a look at Margaret Mead, then those biological males and biological females in those 3 different tribes, they express themselves culturally in very, very different ways. Sometimes masculinity and femininity would align with their biological sex, and sometimes it wouldn't. So where sex is more the biological genetic component of who we are as Homo sapiens and as humans, gender is going to be how we are shaped by our environment, nature and nurture. So it's going to be the cultural aspects of masculinity and femininity. And this is often socialized, or we learn this through our family and where we live around the world, our geographic location, the time period that we're living in, school experiences, the peer groups that we hang out with, the religion that we abide by, whether it's very conservative or very liberal. The media is also going to shape all of this as well. That's fundamentally the difference between sex and gender. So let's talk a little bit how gender is socialized, kind of an extension of what Margaret Mead was really kind of talking about, how environment shapes gender roles. So a lot of this is really going to start in the home, because whenever we're born, we're taken home. So that probably has the biggest impact on our personalities and who we are as individuals, the home that we're raised in. And so the way that our parents treat us, the way that they raise us, the values that they instill are going to shape. Either they have very strong values of traditional parenting style where boys are expected to take on masculine traits and girls are expected to take on more feminine traits, and they may have certain chores and roles that kind of reinforce that. It really kind of depends on the family. But gender socialization, or learning about gender roles or what's expected of us, does begin at birth. So from the moment that we're born, a lot of times, even here in American society, we start to separate boys and girls really from the moment they're born. The kind of clothes that they wear, the girl clothes and boy clothes, and girl and boy colors, and the toys that they're allowed to play with, the way parents interact with them, cutting their hair or not cutting their hair, hairstyles, all of these are really used to kind of differentiate biological males and biological females. There is some evidence to show that girls are more spoken to more than boys whenever they are being raised, so this may kind of result in girls having a more vast vocabulary, a little bit more expressive, where a girl who falls down and gets hurt may their parents may express verbally and emotionally more sympathy, where a little boy may be told very quickly, you need to stand up and dust yourself off, everything's going to be okay. Boys are also allowed to explore more than girls, kind of given a little bit more leeway and freedom, not just as children, but also a lot of times even as teenagers as well. So they may have more impulsive risk-taking behavior because they're kind of allowed to have a little bit longer leash than girls are. But there is a certain type of parenting style that is slowly on the rise. It's called androgynous style parenting. This is where parents are a little bit more open to allowing their daughters or their sons to express themselves in both masculine and feminine ways. So if their daughter tends to be, down here in the South, we call them tomboys, and they like to hunt and fish and do what may be considered kind of masculine things, and driving trucks and four-wheelers, and it's not really a big deal. And there's some parents even down here in the South that are they give a little bit more leeway to their sons to be involved in plays or ballet or acting and different forms of expression that some families may consider to be a little bit more feminine. So androgynous style parenting, allowing the child to really express them the way they want to express themselves, is slowly on the rise, even though traditional style parenting of gender norms is still the norm and still the expectation for the most part. Next, moving on to gender socialization, we have peer group influence. So obviously our parents and our upbringing and our family unit would have a huge influence on our personalities and the way we kind of carry ourselves. But as we kind of move into school settings and hanging out with kids our own age, then a lot of times gender roles are going to be reinforced. If boys are hanging around boys, then masculinity may be heavily reinforced, and more sensitive characteristics may be heavily punished or bullied or made fun of. In the same way with girls, they may expect certain type of feminine traits, and if they're not as feminine as the peer group believes they should be, then they may be bullied because of that. The good thing is that even though unfortunately bullying does exist, it does seem that the younger generation is a lot more accepting of their peer groups who express themselves in more non-binary ways, to kind of express them in more of a fluid type of form of expression, where the older generations were a little bit less tolerant of that. So since the tolerance has really kind of gone up, then non-binary expression, or this gender fluidity, is a lot more accepted throughout, friend groups, but also in academic settings as well. So when it comes to the media and gender roles, there's been kind of a change here as well. If you go back a few decades, and there were pretty strong perceptions that boys, they play with Nerf guns and G.I. Joe, and girls are going to be playing with Barbie dolls and cookware and things like that. But a lot of that is becoming a lot more fluid as well. So commercials, they may show women cleaning and men, mud digging with their trucks and things like that. But even commercials, if you take a look at them, they're starting to be a little bit more gender fluid as well. You'll see fathers that are taking their kids to the park or changing diapers or scrubbing the counter. So we're even noticing that gender roles are starting to blur even in the media as well. We see it in movies, we see it in sitcoms, we see it in series. We're just seeing this level of gender fluidity in American culture and in the media just on the rise. So as you can see, we talked about a lot of different ways that gender is socialized, it's taught, it's reinforced through a lot of these environmental settings. So if you were to go to another country that's a little bit less developed and much more patriarchal or male dominated, then you probably wouldn't see the blurring of these gender roles on the level that you do have here in the United States. They would have very defined roles of men and fathers and husbands in society versus women and mothers and wives in society. So it also really depends on where you live. So next we'll take a look at the women's movement and equality. It's definitely changed a lot of things, especially here in the United States. So the women's movement, a major historical movement that started in the 1840s, quite a long time ago, a few decades before the Civil War, and this was also around the same time the abolitionist movement was taking off as well. There was a lot of buzz and a lot of talking about ending slavery in the United States. So these two major social movements were occurring at the same time. So the first person I really want you to know about is Susan B. Anthony. You may know that she has her own coin, the Susan B. Anthony coin. And so she was a suffragist, which means that she believed for women to have the right to vote. She started the Women's Suffrage Association in 1869, which advocated for women's right to vote, but it's also important to understand that she was also an abolitionist as well. She also believed in ending slavery, which eventually did happen in 1865. So women were talking about not ending, but allowing women the right to vote long time ago, way back in the 1800s. But the law actually didn't change until 1920, many decades later, and this is referred to as women's suffrage. So women's suffrage, women got the right to vote on a national scale in 1920, but they were talking about it way back during the Civil War in the 1860s and before. The Equal Pay Act also came out of the women's movement in 1963. This stated that it is illegal to pay women less than men just because they are biologically female and not biologically male. So prior to 1963, a lot of companies, they did get away with paying women less. Legally, they were able to do things like that, but out of the Equal Pay Act, if women were just as qualified as men for a certain position, they were not allowed to legally get paid less. In 1964, you have Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. This also dealt with employment and the hiring process and promotions. So Title VII, it not only protected biological sex, but also race and religion and ethnicity, and more recently, over the last several years, sexual orientation. So Title VII says that you're not allowed to discriminate in the hiring process or the promotion process. You couldn't discriminate based on one's sex or race, ethnicity, their color, their religion, their nationality, or their sexuality. So that's Title VII. Title IX came out in 1972. This is Title IX of the Education Amendments. So prior to 1972, the vast majority of sports in K-12, college, and university, it was most heavily budgeted and funded for boys and teenagers and young men. But Title IX stated that if there is a demand for girls playing sports in elementary, junior high, high school, or even college or university, that it is the responsibility of the school and to make sure that those things are properly funded equally to boys as well. So in 1972, we started to see a rise in girls getting involved, and young teenage girls and also young women get involved in sports on the academic level. So that's another one of the great successes of the women's movement as well. So we've discussed how women and also some ethnic minorities have been very successful over the last couple hundred years, and more recently throughout the decades through the civil rights movement, the women's movement, to really kind of break the invisible social barrier to allow women and other ethnic minority groups to get in higher levels of position of power and influence and education. And so once that started to happen, where women really started to move into graduating high school and going off to college and becoming career oriented, we started to notice a shift in graduation, especially on the higher ed perspective. So females today are more likely statistically to graduate college and get associate's degrees and bachelor's degrees and even master's degrees. They're much more career oriented, and like we just learned in the previous chapter, that half of the workforce today is women. So it reflects in some of these charts that you're seeing right here. We're also seeing a very slow rise in women moving into positions of political power. They're breaking through that social barrier of politics. So with this particular chart here, it shows, let me widen it up a little bit, make it a little bit easier to see. Okay? All right. So go all the way back to the early 1900s. Very few women were involved in politics or allowed to really kind of be in those circles. This is kind of showing the overall percentage of women that are in U.S. Congress, so that means the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. So you can see through this chart here, through the 20s and 30s, women were still a very small percentage, only around 2%. As you're moving into the 50s and 60s, they're slowly getting elected into some of these positions, about 4%, still not very high at all. But it really wasn't until the early 1990s that it really kind of started to really kind of take off. So women today, this is back in 2015, they made up roughly around 20% of those representatives in the House of Representatives and also the Senate, so somewhere around 20%. And that number today has been on the rise slowly, so now it's roughly around 25%. So still, politics is still heavily dominated by men by around 75%. However, we have to take a look at the trend and the direction that it's going. Women are not only graduating at higher rates than men, they are not only getting these higher positions in the workforce and also moving into these positions of employment power when it comes to supervisors or managers or CEOs. Their numbers are also significantly rising in the realm of politics, and what is projected is that these numbers are going to continue to rise, and rise even more. This chart here kind of reflects it also. It's kind of the breakdown. We talk about Congress, we take a look at the Senate and also the House of Representatives. So this is kind of a breakdown in 2021 of the breakdown of the percentage of men in the House of Representatives and also the Senate, how they do way overshadow women. But these numbers for women are going up, and they're going up steadily every couple of years. So there's a lot of progress being made there.